Hey folks, this is Kelani. I can't tell you how interested I am to see what's on offer at BlizzCon this year, for the World of Warcraft specifically, because right now we don't seem to be in a very good spot. I really think this expansion is at a crossroads, or we'll get to that crossroads very quickly. One path leads to another amazing experience, another Legion expansion, and everyone leaving Battle for Azeroth wishing we had just a little bit longer on Zandalar or Kulturas, or Najdatar, or wherever else we end up. The other path leads to another Warlords, where content gets cut left, right and centre, and the expansion ends up being abandoned to get us to the next one as quickly as possible. No more Najdatar, no more N'Zoth, just straight up into whatever comes next so we can try and forget about what we didn't like about BfA. I think BlizzCon is going to be that pivotal point, where we know what we're dealing with. But I am really worried that we're going to be going down that second path, because with every Q&A that's been done recently, and I have to say, please keep going with the Q&As, they drive so much discussion about the game and how everything is going right now, and we get to see a little glimpse of the ideology behind the design decisions being made. But with the recent Q&As, I can't help but feel like the dev team might be a little out of touch with the player base. When a design decision is backed up by "because that's how we made it," or "you're not playing the game right," that's got to make you question why those decisions were made in the first place. There's quite a few reasons why players aren't having a great time right now, and hopefully the dev team will start listening and really taking this stuff to heart before BlizzCon, because that's where Battle for Azeroth can really be saved. There's a phrase which has been floating around for a while now, and it's become something of a joke. The player base has no idea what it wants. The player base is always wrong. And while it would certainly be a rather marvellous circus if every single suggestion given by a player made its way into the game, that doesn't mean that feedback should be ignored. A large part of alpha and beta is about gathering data. How do quests work? How do zones flow? What level do you get to at what point? Which mobs are overtuned? Where does leveling really slow down? Pretty much all of your actions will be logged and thrown into a spreadsheet so the devs can get an accurate snapshot of how the game currently plays. But the other part of those early testing phases should also be about how the game feels to play. It's not all about numbers and charts. If something isn't fun, and a lot of players are saying this isn't fun for very specific reasons, it's a bit of a slap in the face when nothing really gets changed. Now that would have been actually fine if the system was something that we could get behind with time, but for systems like the Azurite armor and Azurite traits, it seems to have only gotten worse as time goes on. The customer isn't always right, the player base isn't always right. In fact, plenty of businesses hire people to specifically figure out what the needs and wants of their customers are, and they only take a small portion of actual feedback into account. But if you're going to take that approach, you need to actually know what's going to work and be well received. If you think the player base is wrong, and the person whose job it is to know what the player base wants and needs is also wrong, where does that leave you? That's a lose-lose situation which you can't really get out of without some significant changes. That's kind of where we are with the Azurite armor system. Most design decisions seem to remove the potential for fun. You can't swap around your traits freely, each piece of armor gets locked into a specific spec or playstyle, you're encouraged to collect multiple sets to facilitate those issues, but gathering Azurite armor of a higher item level is severely restricted. The system works against itself, and instead of making some changes to alleviate these frustrations, the dev team is trying to put the absolute least amount of bandages that they can get away with onto an open wound. They don't want us to treat them like an extra row of talents, but that's exactly what they are. I mean, it would be nice to get an extra row of talents too. I don't think anyone would say no to another talent row, but that's a different problem with BfA. Let's quickly go over the changes for Azurite armor in 8.1, and of course the recent little addition of Azurite armor from emissary quests, so you can now maybe get another 2 pieces of Azurite armor per week if you do your emissary quests. Everyone can take part in those, hope for an upgrade, fantastic. They even scale up to 370 to stay relevant for longer. That's a really great change, and not just to help with the Azurite armor. Emissary quests were feeling pretty lackluster as well, and should probably be bumped up a little bit more, but the 8.1 Azurite changes are just a band-aid fix, and in a really frustrating way. We're going to get an extra ring with 2 spec-specific traits for each spec we have access to. That's going to increase our available spec traits from 1 to 3 per piece of Azurite armor, so we should be able to take the traits that we want more often. Great, but that doesn't address any of the concerns about spec switching or role switching, which seem to fall on deaf ears at this point. Apparently we shouldn't be wanting to swap specs all too often, and the chap playing Outlaw Rogue the entire time should have an advantage over the chap who wants to swap around his specs to be optimal for various encounters or dungeons. Alright, that's fine, I guess, but what about swapping roles entirely? This isn't limited to pure DPS specs and arguably might not even be the real issue here. If you want to DPS in raids but tank in Mythic Plus dungeons, you only have a few options to really make that happen. The solution that was brought up in the Q&A would be to have your lower level item gear be one of your sets and the higher level item gear the other. So as you get upgrades, you always have some other pieces lying around in your bags that would work for your off-spec, except Azurite traits usually aren't worth a great deal, and primary stat and item level usually is, so an item level upgrade without your spec trait might still not be an upgrade overall. Nothing about those proposed solutions feels great, but what if in patch 8.1, the first ring was changed to include one general trait and 3 spec-specific traits only, and those traits changed as you changed your spec? You can lock the other rings in if you really want to, but having that first ring be spec specific and change with your spec fixes 2 issues. The first is the same as the 8.1 changes. You go from 1 possible spec trait to 3. More choice is always good, but the other issue that gets addressed is the inflexibility of the Azurite armor when it comes to changing specs or roles. I think that would be the more elegant solution, and we reach more or less the same outcome, just with less frustration. But the main problem with Azurite armor will always be the fact that you just can't work towards it as a reward. Every piece of Azurite armor above item level 355 is rewarded randomly. Some pieces are random chance, like in Uldir. That's not too bad. 1 level of RNG to work your way through, and you can even bonus roll if you really want to. At least you know what piece of Azurite armor you can get from each boss. But from there, it only gets worse. Your weekly Mythic Plus cash is a random reward from the pool of dungeon loot, so the chances of actually getting an Azurite piece are extremely small already, but the piece that you get is also going to be random. RNG on top of RNG. Fantastic. The emissary rewards are the same. You have no idea when an emissary might pop up, if at all, so even seeing the reward is based upon RNG, and then the Azurite piece you receive is again completely random. There is a solution to this problem, and it was even brought up in last week's Q&A. Ian said the most popular suggestion is to just let Azurite armor drop from the Mythic Plus dungeons, but they don't really want to do that because then we have an endless supply of Azurite armor. They don't want us to be able to farm it to our heart's content, they want Azurite armor to be restricted. But why? I haven't really seen a compelling argument as to why Azurite armor should be heavily restricted. Mythic Plus already lets us farm the rest of our loot. What's so special about Azurite armor? I would say trinkets could have a larger impact than the Azurite traits we have right now, and we can farm those endlessly, even to the point of a 395 Titan Forge. I just don't get it. You can't have it both ways. You can't say we should be farming multiple sets of gear if we want to play multiple specs or roles. You can't say the traits can be mixed and matched for endless combinations for various scenarios, while saying you can only get 1 or 2 pieces of Azurite armor per week, if you're incredibly lucky. If Azurite armor has to be restricted, let it be more flexible. If we need multiple sets of Azurite armor to actually have fun with the system, let us actually work towards it. It's like they're scared of giving us too much free reign with their Azurite traits. It honestly just baffles me. I don't see any downsides to introducing Azurite armor into the Mythic Plus loot table. It's also just really weird that they would want to restrict our spec options so heavily. But this is an issue which has happened time and time again through World of Warcraft's history. We used to have gear with different main stats on it, so we would need entirely different sets for healing, tanking, and sometimes DPSing, depending on what class you were. In Warlords, they made your main stat change along with your spec. A Paladin would have strength on their gear while they were in Prot and Ret, and then it would change to Intellect when they swapped to Holy. That alleviated the need to carry around so many pieces of gear just to swap specs. It was fantastic. The same change was also made to set pieces. Your set would change along with your spec to give you the appropriate bonuses. Both of these changes work towards freeing up your gameplay and allowing you to make choices relating to your spec much easier. Then in Legion we had a spec-specific artifact which was really rough for the first few months if you ever wanted to swap your spec around. Legendaries didn't really help with that either, so we were back to having a good chunk of progression locked to individual specs. When Battle for Azeroth was announced and our new artifact was revealed, one of the first things that was mentioned was how the artifact will work for all of your specs. There's no more spec-specific artifacts to pump your artifact power into. You can use your gathered AP on any spec you wish and swap any time you want. And then they slapped on all of these restrictions for Azurite armor and said that's how gear has always worked. The back and forth isn't unique to just this one issue either. There's plenty of design decisions which get flip-flopped every expansion, but I just don't understand why we go from you should be free to choose which spec you play to you should have different gear sets for every single spec because you should only be playing one spec. Sadly right now, Azurite armor is just another RNG system on top of an RNG game. Random rewards aren't a new thing in World of Warcraft. We've had Warforging and Thunder Forging and Titan Forging for a little while now. Extra sockets, extra tertiary stats, and extra item levels. It's probably gone on for a little too long at this point, and I don't think it helps the game anymore, if it ever did. I remember when they first introduced these forging systems, it was meant to be a way to keep players interested in raiding for longer. Back in the day, if you ever maxed out your toon and ticked every box on your best in slot list, that was you done for the tier. No point in raiding anymore, at least according to the devs. Personally, I know I stuck around to keep raiding with my friends and guildies, even if I couldn't get an upgrade anymore, but sure, I understand needing a little bit of incentive now and then. So this idea of there can always be an upgrade became the new carrot on a stick to keep people raiding, but I think it's done more harm than good in the long run. A few nights ago, one of our hunters looted a ring off of Mythic Mother in Uldia, 395 Titan Forge with a socket. Discord blew up. Oh my god, grats on the ring! Swiftly followed by disappointing grunts from anyone who got anything less than a 395 Titan Forge with a socket, and everyone throwing in their own little variation of the game is broken, because that shouldn't exist. People shouldn't be able to get such a huge upgrade just by being a little bit lucky. Getting that fully maxed out item might be exciting, both because it's an amazing upgrade most of the time, and it's a pretty rare occurrence, but anytime you don't get that maxed out item, it can actually feel more disappointing than if the Titan Forge didn't exist at all, even if you get an upgrade. It's kind of like playing the lottery. If you win a few bucks, that's pretty cool, but there's always that thought in the back of your mind. What if I got one extra number? I could have won a few $100. What about 2 extra numbers? When you dangle some shiny prizes in front of someone's face, they might not get as excited about winning if they don't get the best prize. Removing the crazy potential of Titan Forging would also bring back some sense of progression between normal, heroic, and mythic, or actually introduce a sense of progression in Mythic Plus. When everyone can get the same loot from doing a +2 or a +10, depending on how lucky you get, suddenly loot doesn't really mean anything anymore. When you can get higher item level loot from normal raiding when compared to mythic raiding, if you just get lucky enough, the lines become very blurred. That might be great for some people, but I do think it's not entirely healthy for the game in the long run. This also ties into something else that I find quite interesting. Titan Forging was designed to keep players interested in raiding and grinding for a little bit longer, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of the main reasons people are participating in raids in Mythic Plus these days, past, the point where they've actually progressed and they're now into farm, is for their personal scores. For raiding, that would be their Warcraft log passes, and for Mythic Plus, their Raider IO score. I know a lot of players who thrive off of the competition that they get from logs, simply because they're competing against more players than they could ever compete against naturally. Getting those 99s or 100s on Warcraft logs feels pretty awesome, and I'm sure a lot of the high-end Mythic Plus players crave to be on the top of the Raider IO charts. Imagine if you took Titan Forging away. Players competing for those rankings would actually have a more even playing field, which would push the deciding factors away from lucky gear drops and more towards skill-based gameplay. It could also make anything to do with world first races a little more interesting, because it wouldn't be a case of who got luckiest with gear, even though it probably kind of is still to an extent. Maybe I'm just talking out of my rear at this point, but removing some elements of RNG from the game could have a really positive effect. Remove the randomness and give us back some rewards we can actively work towards and grind for, strive for. They would have so much more meaning by the time we acquire them. I would love to see a World of Warcraft that relied on good gameplay and solid content to keep people interested, instead of a constant cycle of trying to nibble the carrot on a stick, only to have it pulled away time and time again. Sometimes it's hard to not feel like we're being strung along for the ride, subscriptions in tow. I want to believe the devs when they say the only metric they're interested in is whether or not we're having fun, but it really does look like they want to just increase playtime and sub count sometimes. Legion allied races are a great example of this. One of the questions last week was asking about some catch-ups for the allied races that you can unlock in Legion. The High Mountain Tauren, Nightborn, Lightforged Draenei, and Void Elves. Well, good news! They're going to increase the amount of rep you can earn in Legion, so it should be about twice as fast after 8.1 goes live. That's still going to be a huge chunk of time spent doing old world quests to be able to play something that was advertised with Battle for Azeroth. It's old content at this point. I think it should be phased into the base game, or at least Battle for Azeroth, to allow any new players to pick up those races if they wish to do so. The same should be done with the Mag'har Orcs and Dark Iron Dwarves after the next expansion comes out. It just seems a bit daft to ask anyone to level up a character, grind out Exalted with a faction that has nothing to do with the current endgame, only to have to re-level their character if they want to play the race they wanted to in the first place, or fork over some dollars to race change. Have the allied race quests open up at level 20 if you're worried about the level skip so players can work their way through the story quests as well, but leveling itself is also a bit of a mess at this point, so I guess that probably needs to be worked on first. There's plenty of other reasons why players are disgruntled too. Poor class design choices, leaving some classes in the dirt until a major content patch, a huge amount of bugs since the game launched, it just adds on top of everything else. Island expeditions didn't turn out all that well, and neither did the warfronts. We didn't gain anything new as we leveled from 110 to 120, and when we got to max level we were greeted with the Azurite armor problems. It's bad turn after bad turn, which is really disappointing because Battle for Azeroth looks amazing. The zones are fantastic. I enjoyed every moment of leveling up through both the Horde and Alliance zones. Having different stories and being able to see both sides of the conflict was really cool, and I think done really well. Battle for Azeroth also sounds amazing. The music in World of Warcraft has always been a huge part of why I love the game so much, and BfA didn't disappoint one bit. I've been enjoying all of the possibilities with where the story will go. One Sandy is a great character, and obviously has a secret or two. We could be shaping up to fight the last old god on Azeroth, that we know of, and we'll be finally taking the fight to Queen Azura at some point in the near future. She's been evading us for a little too long at this point. I am a little worried about the storylines in 8.1, with Sylvanas potentially walking down the same path as Garrosh. We'll have to see where that goes. I've been really enjoying Uldir so far, even though some of the bosses are a little too easy to cheese sometimes, and for the most part I really enjoy the dungeons in Battle for Azeroth, so it's definitely not all bad. It's just not all good either, and I think that can be fixed. I love this game. I hope only for the best for this game, and as I said at the start, I'm really interested to see what happens at BlizzCon, because I think that's going to be the pivotal moment for Battle for Azeroth. Hopefully everything works out, and if it doesn't, well, classic WoW could end up being very interesting for a variety of reasons, but we'll save that for another day. I would love for the dev team to open up a bit more about what's going on right now, maybe in more than just a Q&A format, because it might not be the best way to have a back and forth about specific topics, and maybe take some of the feedback they've been receiving to heart. 8.1 might make things a little better, but I can see Azurite armor being a problem time and time again as we hunt for upgrades every new raid tier and every new season of Mythic Plus if more changes aren't made, especially as I've been having a lot of fun on my Death Knight recently, but changing from Blood to Frost is going to give me a headache if I have to reforge every single time. I'll keep my fingers crossed that BlizzCon will fix everything. Probably not, but there we go, and thankfully we don't have to wait too long anymore. What do you think about the whole discussion about player opinion versus dev intention that's been going on recently? What do you hope we'll see at BlizzCon in 2 weeks' time? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.